Welcome to the Kingstonian, a podcast that profiles people who are passionate about what they do for a living, what organization they belong to, or the community they are a part of. Here is your host, Dave Cunningham.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Chocolate. I think almost everyone loves chocolate, but would you make it your business to make chocolate? Some have. We actually had a conversation with Audrey Brown on this program about 6.5 years ago, exploring her passion for making chocolates. In this episode, we speak with Godlewska, who is taking a slightly different path. For most of her working life, she was a geography professor at Queen's University here in Kingston. Last year, she took her love of chocolate to a different level, making chocolate from bean to bar, and not just any beans. In this episode, more on that aspect and how she made that transition from the academic teaching geography to the businesswoman making chocolate bars. Here is my conversation with Godlewska. Anne, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
We want to remind those of you who are listening to the podcast that we are recording this episode in early April of 2023. So, as mentioned in the introduction, after a career as a professor of geography, you segued into a new passion, a maker of chocolate. Quite a change.
It is yes, it is and it isn't.
Let's talk a little bit about the academic side before we go into the chocolate side.
Sure.
Okay. So you are a professor of geography, and one of the things professors focus on, for those folks who may not be aware, is that professors tend to focus on a particular area that interests them, and yours is the history of mapping. Why did you pick that particular focus?
That's an interesting story. My great uncle was a diplomat prior to the Second World War, and traveled extensively. And wherever he traveled, he was interested. He was Polish. He was a Polish diplomat, and he was interested in Polish maps and collecting Polish maps. And so he developed an enormous collection of Polish maps. And then when he died, my father was the executor, and all of these maps flowed through the house, and they had to be sent off to the Warsaw archives. And then there were some maps that were left that had to be sold. And all of these maps came through the house just exactly at the moment I was trying to decide what am I going to do in my undergraduate degree, or my graduate degree, actually, with my undergraduate degree. And so that's why I did initially the history of mapping. But I didn't stay with the history of mapping. I moved on to the history of science more broadly because mapping fits into all sorts of other fields, and I was interested in that. And then eventually, toward the end of my career, I started working on Indigenous people in Canada, particularly focusing on settler or Indigenous settler relations, which are, as you can imagine, pretty troubled. Mm-hmm.
One of the things I'd like to go back to is the business of, I think your focus was on imperialism and colonialism, and how does that translate to the study of mapping? What are you looking for when you're looking at maps, when you have that focus in the back of your mind?
Oh, that's all about control. Control over territory, control over resources. So knowing something so that you can control and manage it. And imperialism was very much about knowing about things so that you can make them worth something to you, valuable to you, from the point of view of the metropole, from the point of view of so the metropole was doing a huge amount of mapping, and then it would take over where it found Indigenous mapping and Indigenous geographic knowledge. It would incorporate it into its own system. So maps are, very embodiment of imperialism and colonialism and the whole way that imperialism and colonialism functions. I will reorder everything concerning you. I will reorder everything that you value, figure out if it's valuable to me, and then take it if it's valuable to me, reject it if it's not valuable to me.
By putting it all on paper and
so the map
changing
the map symbolizes that. Yeah. Putting it all on paper, changing, maybe incorporating place names, maybe incorporating cultural information, maybe rejecting it.
Or changing names. Okay.
Or changing
I never thought of that part of it.
Or changing it.
France and Egypt.
Yes.
Is something that you did focus on. So give us a bit of an example of how this particular study works into France and Egypt.
So, France was France was fascinated by Egypt. All of Europe was fascinated by Egypt, but the French went into Egypt, and what they wanted, Napoleon was sort of trying to follow in the footsteps of Alexander the Great, and when Alexander the Great traveled, he traveled with a bunch of intellectuals. He traveled with, the top intellectuals he brought with him. And that's what Napoleon did too. He created an institute of about 150 scholars of all sorts. And they went into Egypt with Napoleon. And what Napoleon was doing, I mean, he was involved with conquest. He was involved in, interested in the Suez Canal, or there wasn't one at that time, but creating the Suez Canal, a route through to the east. He was interested in expansion, global expansion. This guy was not thinking small at all. But he also was interested, all the scholars were interested in capturing Egypt and taking Egypt back to France. So essentially exactly that whole mapping idea, knowing it, but not just in this case, not just mapping, but mapping was at the core of it, but knowing everything they could about plant and animal life, knowing everything they could about ancient Egypt, trying to figure out the hieroglyphs and understand everything about Egypt that they could. And in a sense, it was an enormous success. It was a failure as a military expedition. I mean, Napoleon left after, about a year. And then the army was defeated and they were kicked out. But it was an enormous success in the sense they created this description of Egypt, this multi-volume work, including an atlas, which is at the core of it. And then, which really ignited something called Egyptomania, which, if you want to see it, is in buildings all across all across Europe, but also all across the United States, Canada, many parts of the world, where you'll see Egyptian symbolism from the 19th century, typically. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. At some point, you decided to, as you mentioned before, to repatriate your work to Canada and focus on Indigenous organizations, nations, and the impact of mapping there. So how does that play into your study?
So I had already moved a little bit more broadly into the history of science and also a little bit history of literature, if you like. But I was trying to repatriate my work to Canada because although I was fascinated by France, I still am, French culture, French imperialism, colonialism, which was largely disastrous. I felt that my students here were Canadian and interested in Canadian things, and I needed to refocus on Canadian things. And I started by thinking, well, let's keep it French. So what can I do? What kind of, what have I encountered that's French? And what I encountered were the Jesuits, who were very much involved with imperialism, French imperialism. And so I thought, well, I'll look at the Jesuits, but, all my career in the history of science, history of mapping, it's all about men. It's men. There's no women in it. I'm a woman. Let me try and see if I can find something about women. And that landed me with the Ursulines, because the Jesuits were in the French sort of early French imperialists in Canada. And that landed me with the Ursulines. And so I started studying the Ursulines and Marie de l'Incarnation in particular, and her letters that I became fascinated with. So
this is an order of nuns?
It's an order of nuns.
Yeah.
That's the Ursuline, sorry, yes. But the Catholic in me assumes that everybody knows this. But not everybody knows this, or should. Anyway.
I do, because I went to a Jesuit-run high school.
There you go.
In Kingston.
There you go. There you go. That's the universe. Anyway, so I became really interested in her letters. At the same time, by chance, I was reading Indigenous authors, just fiction, at the time. And so in order to find the background and understand Marie de l'Incarnation's letters, I started reading the Jesuit Relations, which were the Jesuit accounts of their encounters with Indigenous people in Canada. And when I started reading modern literature, and I was reading the Jesuit Relations at the same time, I saw characterizations of Indigenous people in the Jesuit Relations that modern Indigenous people, modern Indigenous intellectuals and writers were still having to answer, right? Mm. And that fascinated me. And so from there, I became really interested in what's going on in Canada between the Canadian government and Indigenous people, between settlers and Indigenous people. And how do I begin to understand this relationship? And very, very troubled relationships is the better way to put it. And the problem isn't Indigenous people. The problem is settlers.
Yeah.
So that's what I became really interested in, and that's what I spent the last part of my career doing. It was very difficult work. What I was trying to figure out was, when I taught a class on settler Indigenous relations, and I found that the students that I was teaching knew as little about Indigenous people as I was taught in the 1960s and 70s, and that just floored me. That just couldn't, like, how can we be so bad in our teaching that we've done this? What's going on here? And I became very interested in that, and in that ignorance as a political force. And so I started studying that, and I tried to start to measure that and analyze that in schools, but not studying in schools, but studying what's coming out of the schools, and then in universities and what's coming out at the end of universities. And at that time, it was an enormous problem. I think it's still a pretty major problem. Why is the work difficult? One of the things I was trying to do was to establish, a baseline of knowledge that Indigenous people would consider essential. Like, what do settlers need to know to be good citizens in this country? And so I worked very closely with Indigenous people, essentially designing a questionnaire, and it had many iterations, and was negotiated constantly. Those negotiations were not easy, because there was a lot of anger, a lot of very, very justified anger. Yeah. And, I'm a white person, and who the hell am I? Who the heck am I? Sorry. Who the heck am I?
It's a podcast. We're okay.
Okay, all right, that's good. So that was difficult, but more difficult was I would take this questionnaire and try and work with universities to analyze what was being taught and how effective it was, and the kind of resistance that I met. It was just resistance from one end of the project to the other end of the project. Utterly exhausting. And I think we did some very important work, and we may have moved some social forces. You never really know the impact of your work. You never quite know. But I would say that at the end of it, I was pretty exhausted, and happy to retire.
Yeah.
Happy to stop. Still very interested, but no, I just can't put my energy there.
See, it would have been nice to have these kinds of courses when I was taking geography at Queen's way back then. But
I bet it would have been.
Yeah. But that was 50 years ago. So you're retired. This is what, you've been retired for about a year now?
For about a year, yeah.
And you made a completely different change, although there are some aspects of what you're doing now that play into some of the stuff that you learned when you were focused on Indigenous work or mapping or some of the history that you were taking or focusing on at university. So you are a chocolate maker from bean to bar, which is something that's different. Mm-hmm. And for those people who may not be aware of the expression, why don't you explain what bean to bar really involves?
Okay, so most chocolate that you will consume is chocolate made by big chocolate makers, maybe Mondelez, maybe Ferrero Rocher, a whole series of big, maybe about 12 huge chocolate makers, Mars, Hershey's. And somebody said, I sort of hesitate over the names because people buy out other people and then it changes. But Kaibo, for example, is another really, really big chocolate maker. A
lot of consolidation going on.
There has been. And they represent a huge economic force. They use huge grinders, enormous grinders. In fact, it's the grinders are a big part of the making of chocolate. But in any case, they source their chocolate mostly in West Africa, and they source
This is the big companies.
These are the big companies, mostly in West Africa, not exclusively by any means, but mostly in West Africa, and they are really, they're not about the they're not about the nature of the bean. They're sort of like, I mean, I guess, do you remember Gallo wine? You remember?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they're kind of like Gallo, as opposed to people who are worried about, whether it's Cabernet Sauvignon or whether, whatever, what is the grape. So these people, they're not about the bean. They're more like a McDonald's. They want their chocolate to always taste the same wherever it is. And they work for that, really, to eliminate variety, if you like.
So when we're talking about beans, are beans grown in a particular area of the world?
Yes.
Like West Africa is one you mentioned, but they have to be within a certain distance of the equator?
Yeah, 20 degrees. 20 degrees north and south of the equator. And that's the zone within which they can grow. Exceptionally, they might grow, Hawaii might grow some, Japan might grow tiny number of them. But for the most part, that's the big production area.
Okay.
And in that, it is also important how much rain there is, whether, what the quality of the soils is, for all that, it matters. But that's where it's grown. Now, West Africa has been a very, very big producer, but the relationship between West Africa and these big grinding companies has been quite disastrous, because their demand is kind of insatiable. The price that they offer is very low. Their control over their relationship with the farmers is quite distant. They're working with multiple traders, so the farmer might be way up into the countryside, and they will sort of have their beans. They'll ferment them or not ferment them, treat them however they treat them, put them into a bag at the end of the property, and a trader will pick it up, take it to another trader, who'll take it to another trader, and so on. So there are multiple traders down the road. So they don't have a lot of control over what's going on in a lot of these farms, and because the prices are low, it has actually put the whole industry there under huge pressure. So in West Africa, there's been massive deforestation, and there's also been at various times, Carol Off revealed this in Bitter Chocolate in her interviews and in Bitter Chocolate, her book Bitter Chocolate, major problems with child slave labor. So generally just huge economic pressure that has done a lot of harm. Of course, the problems in West Africa are not just from the cocoa grinders. There are a lot of problems that are sort of indigenous problems, if you like.
So at this particular point, where do you get your beans, and why did you choose the location to get your beans from? So
there are really two ways that I can get beans. I can get beans through a company, a direct trading company called Uncommon Cacao in the United States, and they work directly with farmers and with some traders and co-ops. But they're a problem for me, because if I buy my beans through the United States, I pay customs coming into the United States, and then I pay customs coming into Canada. I pay shipping so that they can get the beans, and then I pay shipping so that I can get the beans. So this is very prohibitive for me. So I get my beans from a guy in Toronto, from his company Mabco, M-A-B-C-O, and his name is Juan Gonzalez, and he travels the world trying to find excellent quality beans. And he grew up working on cocoa farms, so he knows the business, from the ground up, from the seed up, and he finds these fantastic beans, and he makes sure that they are fermented properly, which is really, really critical in cocoa. So fermentation happens either on the farm or maybe a couple of kilometers from the farm in a co-op. And the fermentation process is very important. So under-fermented chocolate is very bitter. I mean, if you get a Lindt chocolate bar and you go for the 90% or the 100% or 99%, I guess it has to be, dark chocolate, you will find that that's really a very bitter bar and not particularly pleasant to eat. But in fact, if you have good quality chocolate, you can go very high percentage and it's still quite delightful to eat. So so if it's under fermented, it's bitter. If it's over fermented, it kind of tastes cheesy, or moldy, and you don't want either of those.
It's
things.
not good.
Neither, no.
Let me go back to the beans for half a sec. The business of dealing with this particular fella in Toronto, one, ethics is important to you in terms of where the beans come from, who grows them, the attitude towards the farmers, that particular process, which plays into what you were spending time on when you were a professor at Queen's.
Right. Exactly. Right? Exactly. I mean that does matter, and afterwards I continue to research that and continue to be interested in that. Yes, I mean it's essentially about. I mean, Uncommon Cacao sort of focuses on what is it called? Sort of being accountable. Getting sort of a forensic accounting, I can't remember the term for that is, but basically, being checked out, that the price I'm offering is a price that I say I'm offering and so on. But really, fair trading, fair dealing is, I won't say fair trading because that's another thing and not all that applicable to chocolate. Fair dealing is really about relationships. It's about, I'm going to do business with you, and I want to make a profit, so we have to come to some arrangement here that's reasonable. But I don't want to hurt you. I want you to profit. I want you to do well. Yeah. And I want to enjoy my business with you because, I'm here to enjoy life as well as anything else. And so it's all about relationships. And so I deal with Juan because I find Juan, a good human being. I find him interested in the people he's working with, and yes, he's definitely a businessman, but he's not trying to get the lowest possible price he can get for the bean. He's trying to get the highest quality that he can get for the bean. So it's a question of trust, and I ask him about his relationships and what he's doing, and that's what I have to rely on. I can't do much more than that.
We did a little tour of your facility here in the house, and I was impressed with the bits and pieces of the process and how it all works and the machines you have to use to get the job done. Let me go back to the beginning of this. So you're still at Queen's and you're about to retire and you're going, what am I going to do when I finish at Queen's? How did the decision come to get into this whole thing? Because we haven't even started to talk about the process yet. Where did you decide
Well,
to get into making chocolate?
It's two. I mean, there are two sort of stories that explain it to me, right? And that when I think about it, that's what I think about. And one is that I love food, and food is sort of goes back through my mother, my grandmother, my father, his family, all the way back, and so for me it's a cultural continuity, and so food is something that I really enjoy, and I really enjoy making the very best quality. So chocolate I've always loved. I love chocolate from very early childhood, and but as I've grown older, I've become dissatisfied with a lot of it. And I remember, I used to go and get Dascalides chocolate in Belgian chocolate in Paris, and I used to really look forward to it. But after a little while, it was always the same thing. Mm-hmm. The chocolate wasn't really that good. And I became kind of disappointed in it. And I also, any boxes of chocolates I found, this is very nice, but I mean, it's always the same thing. I mean, everything's a formula, and really the chocolate's not that good. And so that's one story where I love food, and there's a sense of cultural continuity and depth in food that chocolate goes back 5,000 years, we believe, its consumption. So I'm really interested in that kind of thing. But the other story is that I wanted to take care of my mother to the end of her life. And so I was caring for her in this house. And the kitchen at that time it's open to the living room. And so it is still a little further back from it, but it is still. And it was something, she toward the end of her life, she became much less communicative, but she needed me near. And so it was a way of working with chocolate was a way of being near her, while working with chocolate. Mm-hmm. And also, toward the end of her life, she didn't need much food. I didn't need much food. Cooking became kind of like, I couldn't do much of it. So I could make chocolate. And then, so for about 5 years, maybe even 7 years, I made chocolates, not chocolate itself. I made chocolates the way everybody else does from commercial chocolate, and made boxes of it and just gave it away to my friends. So, by the end, I was giving away 80 boxes of chocolate every Christmas.
Yeah.
And so that's what I was doing. But so it was a way of being with her. And that, to me, those two stories meld in the sense of continuity, family continuity, belonging, a sense of belonging. And also, it linked also to my indigenous work, if you like, because the people who are making chocolate around the world are indigenous people. Mm-hmm. And they are not getting good prices, as is typical. For what they're doing. And when you think about the chocolate, you get your chocolate, you saw all the processes that it went through here, like maybe about, 11 separate processes to make it from the bean. But beyond that, behind that are all the processes involved in making the chocolate, growing the cacao, Theobroma cacao, taking care of it, cultivating it, harvesting, fermenting, drying, and then packaging. This is, it's much more than I do. Okay, and they're getting pennies for what they do. They're getting $12 a day, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And this is all links very much to the global economy, to the history of imperialism and colonialism, the continuity of that in today. In today's economy and in our lifestyles. And linked to the problem of the constant dispossession and devaluation of indigenous people.
Yeah. The process, you've got the beans, you pick them up in Toronto.
Yep.
And so you come back home. So we should tell folks that this is a one-woman show. Ooh. Essentially.
Ooh, wait a minute.
Maybe not quite.
No, I have a partner.
I have a partner. Okay, so it's a two-woman show.
Well, it's my company, right?
Right.
But my partner holds my hand, and anytime I have a problem, she comes and helps me with it, and helps. Well, absolutely. Often I'll be struggling with it for days, and she'll say, "Well, what about this?" And this is usually what works. So yeah.
So we have a commercial kitchen that has been put into part of the house. And we have pieces of equipment that I saw before we started this conversation. The process of taking the beans. So we've got the beans, and what are we doing with the beans before we do anything else?
Well, first thing is you sort them and look at them, make sure that they're decent quality. Then you roast them. Then you take them out of the roaster, you crack them. You winnow them. And so winnowing is separating the chaff, or separating the outside skin. The shell. From the bean, and cracking it not so that it breaks up, so that it's just fairly big pieces. You winnow them, so you separate that. You do that, and then after you winnow them, what do? You pre-grind them so that you preserve your grinder. So you have some kind of more of a metal grinder. You pre-grind them, then you take them into the grinder and you grind them typically for about 3 days. So it's a big wheels, big granite wheels on a granite base, mm-hmm. and it grinds for 3 days, and then you take it out of the grinder and you put it into a melter concher machine.
When it comes out of the grinder, what form is it in?
It's liquid.
Okay.
So actually, you're right. I went too fast. You grind the beans for about 10 hours. Then you add sugar, and some cocoa butter probably. And then you grind for the remaining 3 days, and then you transfer it into a melting machine. A melting machine is just really a holding machine that keeps the chocolate melted, and concher, so that it does both things. And a concher mixes the chocolate under pressure and heat. Which
does what to the chocolate?
It softens it out. It smooths out the flavors. It removes some of the maybe acidity, some of the more harsh flavors. It smooths them out and removes them. If you do it for too long, I do it for about 45 minutes. If you do it too long, it destroys the flavor of chocolate.
When you are going through this part of the process, so you've added maybe some sugar and maybe some cocoa butter to the mix, to the chocolate. When it comes into this liquid form that's in the holding tank and you're putting it under pressure, does it have a particular flavor based upon the bean?
Well, I'm getting two different varieties of bean from Nicaragua. I'm getting some beans from Mexico. I'm getting beans from Colombia, and I'm getting them from Thailand. And it is remarkable how different the flavor of each is.
Do you have to be a connoisseur to be able to distinguish? Is it like the difference between Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's like that. It's like that difference. I mean, it depends on how you eat chocolate. I mean, if you just chow down a chocolate bar and don't think about it, then you might not notice the difference. But if you take a piece of chocolate, let it melt on your tongue, and then just think about how it tastes, and then have another piece from a different bean, you will be like, whoa. Yeah. And that's one of I sell chocolate sometimes in markets and fairs. I'm in the Memorial Market in Kingston as of May 7th. But I go to different shows, and when I go, I always have samples of ideally all of the bars, and people, I think, are really quite amazed when they taste the difference, because they just get small pieces and put it in their mouth and then try another small piece, and I'm like, what? This is completely different, and it really, really is. I mean, some will be a little citrusy, some will be more like tropical fruit, some will be a bit nutty, without any nut in it. And some might have, a little taste of cinnamon in it. I mean, it's really quite remarkable how. So, you can take tasting courses for chocolate.
Of course you can.
And become essentially, of course you can, and essentially become a chocolate sommelier. I've taken 2. When I first took them about a year ago, I thought, well, am I gonna taste this? Am I gonna be? First of all, here I am, 65, or at least I was then. Am I going to be able to taste the difference? I mean, I don't have 30-year-old or 20-year-old taste buds anymore, and not only that, am I going to be discerning enough? Am I? Wow, did I learn? I mean, oh yes, you can taste it. You just have to give it time. You have to, and you also have to trust your own taste. You have to go, okay, well, no, I'm not tasting this, but I'm tasting that, and I'm tasting this, and really start thinking about what you're tasting. It's really about mindful eating.
Paying attention. So we have the chocolate now. It's in the big container, and it's being circulated, and it's being put under pressure. And what are we doing it after? What's the next step?
Okay, so you can keep that chocolate in that bin more or less indefinitely, but you can't conch it. You can only conch it for a short time. So you do that
That's
for
the pressuring.
45 minutes.
Okay.
That's the pressuring. You only do that for a little while. And then after that, it goes back to just being a melter. And from there, you move it into a tempering machine. Now, you can temper. There are many different ways to temper. But what tempering means is you're trying to get the chocolate to align, the chocolate crystals to align in a particular way, to behave in a particular way. So you want them to be form 5 crystals. So there are 6 possible forms.
How big is a crystal?
Oh my goodness,
okay.
Microscopic. Okay. Yeah, really, 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 really small. So you want, but that's what you want. That it's sort of like when you make a mayonnaise, you're trying to get an emulsion. You're trying to get it to behave in a particular way. When you make the same thing for a Caesar salad, the Caesar dressing is the same thing. It's essentially an emulsion, and chocolate is really tiny particles of chocolate suspended in cocoa butter. That's really what chocolate and sugar is suspended in cocoa butter. So what you're trying to get is the crystal formation, the correct crystal formation for that cocoa butter more than anything.
So does that make it soft? Is that the idea?
No, when it's still wet, when it's still warm and therefore wet, and it's tempered, it'll look shiny. It'll look shiny. It's kind of like it'll look silken and shiny. When it hardens and it's tempered, the chocolate will crack when you break it. It'll crack, make a cracking sound instead of a dead sound, and it will be depending on the color of the chocolate, either brown or black, shiny, and it'll have an excellent shelf life because it's tempered.
Okay. That's one of the advantages of tempering is the shelf life.
Oh, yeah. The other thing is that you're putting the chocolate into molds, and if it's not tempered, it will not come out of the mold. Okay. And if it's tempered, as you saw, it just
falls right out of the mold. Okay, so we take the tempered chocolate, we put it in molds, and we put it in a fridge to shock it.
So bean to bar chocolate is very difficult to temper. The commercial grade chocolate that most chocolatiers are working with has been modified to make it easier to temper. But the bean to bar chocolate is just, it's just what it is. And tempering can be quite difficult. So shocking it with cold helps a great deal. And then it's tempered. So after that, I'll put it into a fridge that my near-engineer, my partner, Joan Stevenson, has modified. And what she did with that fridge is I had three, like most fridges, you have three shelves. Well, anyway, so then but you only need it there about 3 hours, and then you take it out, and you take it out of the mold. I put it into a cellophane packaging, which keeps it safe, and then I put it into food safe, and then I put it into the packaging that we designed. So that and then that goes into, as you said, that goes into a wine fridge that we've modified so that'll hold chocolate bars. And why a wine fridge? Well, a normal fridge, you cannot get a fridge by law, I don't think, that will be the temperature of a wine fridge. So I need 55 degrees, I believe that, 55 degrees Fahrenheit is what I need for chocolate to last a very long time. And so that's what I do. I store my chocolate there. Not that any of the chocolate has lasted a long time so far.
That's the whole point.
That's the whole point.
Let me redirect you here. Question: is chocolate good for you?
That's a good question. Well, insofar as it has sugar and fat in it, no. And that's why it's really important to have fairly high cocoa content in chocolate. But the chocolate that I have is FDA approved, or FDA levels for cadmium and lead, so that's safe. But in addition to that, chocolate actually, it is supposed to be good for you. It has, I don't have the tip of my tongue here. So it has flavonols. It has more of all the good things you find in blueberries and kale than you'll find in blueberries and kale. So in fact, it's good for your heart. It's good for your circulation system, and it makes you feel good. And when you feel good and you're happy, that's good too. But chocolate, because of the fat and the sugar, it's something that you need to eat in moderation. And one of the things about this chocolate is it's intense. It's a really strong chocolate flavor. Not a lot of other things have been added in to make it taste less like chocolate. And so that means that when you eat it, it's really intense. And you don't really feel like you have to have 15 pieces of chocolate or 3. You can just have one piece and enjoy it and go on about your business. And so that's one of the really great things about this. It's intense. It's good. It's actually, there's a fair bit of research saying that, with respect to the dark chocolate, it's pretty heart healthy. It's pretty circulation healthy. That's good. So, yeah.
When we were looking at the equipment downstairs, I noticed that you had a couple of things that were segregated for chocolate that involved milk.
Yes.
Now, is this because you're adding milk and it doesn't work in the other machines, or it contaminates, if you will, the other machines that don't use milk?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I like to keep the milk products. If I'm going to make a milk chocolate, I'll use a milk chocolate or a white chocolate. I will use different machines. The machines that I'm using for dark chocolate are very big. The manufacturers really don't want them cleaned with water because water contaminates chocolate and it's very difficult to clean them properly. They want them cleaned maybe with cocoa butter if you run cocoa butter through it. But the machines are difficult enough to clean. It's not really a problem if I have a dark batch of, say, Colombian followed by my Thailand Canterbury, and there's a tiny bit of the Colombian that gets into the Canterbury, that doesn't matter at all. But if that were milk or white, it would matter a lot. It would contaminate the chocolate. So I would never claim that my chocolate, while I would never claim that my chocolate is milk or nut free, I work very, very hard to make sure that the dark chocolate is not contaminated by milk. And there are no nuts in the facility whatsoever. But yet, this facility is in a home, and there are nuts in the home. So I can't claim a nut-free facility. I wouldn't ever claim it.
What's the proportion of chocolate that you make that's milk chocolate versus dark chocolate or chocolate without milk in it?
Well, that's a really good question. At the moment, I make probably 5 times as much, if not more, maybe 7 times as much dark chocolate as anything else. And the reason that I do that because I'm after particular beans and particular flavors, and mostly people who are interested in bean to bar are interested in dark chocolate. But there is actually a really big market for milk chocolate, and most milk chocolate, frankly, is garbage. And so there's a, so I'm making a dark milk, and I find that even the people who really prefer dark chocolate really kind of like this dark milk. And so there's a market for it. So my sense is I'm not answering your question because I don't really know the answer. The first question you asked, how much do you want to make of milk and white versus dark? At the moment, I'm making mostly dark, but I think there may be a pretty big demand for milk, and there's a small demand for white. Yeah. But there's a demand for milk. But by the way, the white that I make bears no relationship to the commercial white. It's really quite different.
Let's talk about selling your chocolate, because this is a business for you.
Yes.
So you mentioned before that you do go to a memorial market, which is located in Kingston, and it operates in the spring to the fall. Yeah. It's an outdoor market, if I remember correctly. So is this something that you're going to expand upon in terms of marketing your chocolate? Like, how big do you want to get with this?
Right now I want to stay small. This is about making quality chocolate for people who love chocolate. And I really, the whole shipping world is a world that I don't particularly enjoy. So I'd like to make it so that, people locally come to get the chocolate. They come to get it from me, from my home, or I bring it to them, or ideally they come and pick it up at the market. Yeah. I have a webpage, which you have, which will show the chocolates that I have. But really, I'm not interested in selling to Finland, for example, they have a fantastic chocolate maker. I'm not interested in selling around the world. I'm interested in selling here. This is my first year of operation. I don't know this is my first market will be May the 7th. I don't know how many people are going to buy chocolate. I don't know how much chocolate they're going to buy. I don't know how much I have to make. And that's kind of exciting, actually. It's totally
might have to
exciting.
Put an addition onto the house.
Yes, well, this has been pointed out to me. But as you've seen, the house is getting kind of invaded. It's not the chocolate that's invading it; it's the packaging that's invading it.
What kind of reaction are you getting from the folks who have bought the chocolate and tasted it?
Well, those who come back and talk to me about it love it, and they say it's the best chocolate they've ever had. They say it's remarkable. They had no idea. I did a tour of my kitchen a week ago, and they were just amazed at what it takes to make chocolate. What goes into it. So they're very positive. They're very, very positive. And people come back and want more chocolate. And but they don't necessarily come back 2 weeks later because they may have bought 5 bars, and they may have bought a fair bit, and it takes them a while to work their way through it, which is what I want. I don't really want them to scarf the chocolate.
Now, as you mentioned, we have a website that folks can go to, and we'll put the address for the website in the liner notes to the episode. And for those of you who have a pen and pencil ready, the website is Choc Chic, spelled CHOCCHIQUE, which is the name of the website where folks can get all sorts of information about your particular business. Thanks very much for your hospitality today, and all the best with the new business.
Thank you so much, Dave. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Our guest in this episode, Anne Godlewska, converting those special beans into tasty chocolate. The business is called Choc Chic, and you'll find the web address in the liner notes. Thank you for listening, and I'll be back soon.
The theme music for the podcast is Stasis Oasis, written and performed by Kingston musician Tim Aylesworth. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions about any of the episodes, please send a note to the Kingstonian podcast at gmail.com. For details on upcoming guests, follow us on Facebook. The Kingstonian podcast is hosted by Dave Cunningham and produced in Kingston, Ontario, Canada.